Have we got picture? We've got picture. Good morning and welcome. I'm Jen and this is...
I'm Hannah.
And you're very welcome if you're watching us now live. You watch us later on demand or in the podcast or all those other things that I don't know how you watch this later on, but you can, which is great. So we are continuing our series of talks this week on whole life worship. We've got Helen talking to us this morning, and I'm just reading it because I'm just trying to remember what we're actually talking about this morning. So Helen will be talking to us about worshipping inspires our everyday speech. So worshipping inspires our everyday speech. And I think for me, and Helen might not touch on this, but for me, it's sort of about like, when we're looking at whole life worship, words can be really complimentary. It's like, oh, Hannah, your hair looks lovely this morning. You look really good. That's complimentary words. It builds Hannah up. But they can also be really damning, which I'm not going to use Hannah as an example. But you can actually really damage people's self-esteem, confidence, how they're feeling about themselves just with words. So actually, how do we make our words worshipping through our words and our everyday speech? So hopefully Helen's going to give us some tips about that in a little bit, but we are going to just have a look to see what this series is all about.
Forgive us, Lord, for the words we speak that cause fear, exclude others, twist the truth, diminish, divide, and destroy. Words that roar, words that clang like cymbals but bring no clarity. Words that make us sound powerful but are void of love. Teach us your words of healing and hope, thankfulness and grace, justice and truth, wisdom and love, forgiveness and blessing. Let our words be your words. Touch our mouths with your coal and purify our speech. Teach us a new language when we are gathered. When we are scattered, let our language breathe heaven into the lives of those we meet.
There you go. Helen's going to come and speak to us. I'm going to pray for her before she does. Set her up. Thank you, Lord, for my friend Helen, your friend Helen, our friend Helen. Just bless her as she shares her heart with us and your heart for us through her words. So just open our hearts, open our ears so that we might be blessed and changed by what she says. Amen. Let's go, Els.
Cheers, pal. If I get one big cough in before we start, hopefully I won't need to do any more as we go through. Good morning. Good morning, whether you're here in the building with us, whether you're on the stream, whether you're in screen 2, which is still in the building, but out the other room, whether you're listening on the podcast, whether you're watching on catch-up on YouTube, you are all very welcome, and we're glad you're here, whether you're physically here or not. But what I want you to do first, before we go too far, is think through the morning that you've had, or the day that you've had if you're listening later. Think through everything you did this morning. Think through everything you have said this morning. Think through everything you have thought this morning, if maybe the first word you said was the beginning to open the eyes of my heart, Lord, the first song we sang this morning. And now, I don't know about you, but I do not understand Lionel Richie. Lionel Richie has a song that says, "Easy like a Sunday morning." And now I don't know about any of you, Sunday mornings are not always the easiest. They're lovely once I get to church, but that couple of hours before I get here is often quite manic. Maybe yours was. I mean, maybe you did have a Lionel Richie morning and you woke up, had a lovely cooked breakfast and sauntered over to church. Marvellous. Genuinely happy for you. But maybe, just maybe, like me, you just got a bit wound up when the bathroom was being used when you needed it. Or that your son decides that your toast looks better, despite the fact he was 400% certain that he wanted cereal. Suddenly, he wants your toast. Or maybe you've just trodden on that toy, and it's always the really spiky one. I don't know how it happens. When I'm walking from A to B, it's always a spiky toy that I manage to stand on. And in those moments, do I still manage to speak positively, to think positively, to not say to my husband, "You knew I had to leave at this time and I haven't used the bathroom yet. Why would you have a shower now?" I didn't this morning, for a change, mainly because I knew I was doing this talk. There is a quote which is often attributed to St. Francis of Assisi. Whether he actually said it or not, who knows? He's not here to ask. That said, "Preach the gospel at all times. If necessary, use words." And I love it. I really enjoy that. I love the idea that actually we show who God is with our actions far more than we do our words. I'm a great believer in actions speak louder than words. Preach the gospel at all times. If necessary, use words. Walk the walk. Practice what you preach. I love all of them. Actions are so important. And most talks that you hear me give, I will focus on that and will rarely talk about words. However, this morning, the title I was given was "Worshipping Inspires Our Everyday Speech." Because if we look at those phrases again, you'll actually notice that they all talk about words too. Actions speak louder than words. Preach the gospel at all times. If necessary, use words. Practice what you preach. And the full phrase, you talk the talk, but do you walk the walk? Words are still really important. And now before I start, I want to make it super, super, super clear what I mean by words or speech. So as I say, the title I was given was "Worshipping Inspires Our Everyday Speech." But I really want to stress this is not just the sounds that come out of our mouth. It is your method of communication. It's however you portray what you are thinking, what you are feeling, and telling things to others. Yeah, for a lot of us, that will be the most common way we communicate, will be our spoken speech. However, it is just as valid if it's written down text, whether it be emails or texts. Maybe you speak through an AAC, and actually, so you speak using like a very, very clever, very cool iPad style of communication. Maybe you use sign language, maybe you use gesture, facial expression, pointing. Whatever your communication looks like, worshipping inspires that. So maybe it actually should have been worshipping inspires our everyday communication. Even in that song that we just sang, so if you've got the words to that bridge, I really enjoy it, this one. "And all the earth will shout your praise, our hearts will cry, these bones will sing, great are you, Lord." Actually, the earth doesn't shout. Our hearts don't actually cry, and bones don't actually sing. But actually, this is still talking about us praising and about us worshipping. So it's however you communicate. And what I really like in this one, many of you will know I'm a sign language interpreter, and I really enjoy this bridge when it says "these bones will sing." I like to think that's talking about sign language, because actually when you sing, it is your bones doing it. That's just an aside. Thanks, Sue. Look, there's a lot of stuff in songs about how we speak and how we sing. It's nice that, feels like sign language gets a recognition. But anyway, what I'm basically saying is this applies to everyone. You have no excuse. As many of you will know, I have a 4-year-old son who started school last week. And across the whole school site, I go on school visits with my job. I go to colleges, universities, primary schools, you name it, I am in them. And what you can see, almost in every school, is talk of British values. And now this is something that the Department for Education calls the 5 British values. And across schools in England, I think it's just across England, maybe Scotland, someone online, if you can tell me if it includes Scotland and Wales and Northern Ireland, I don't know. But the concept of British values is promoted as a part of our curriculum. This is their wording. Is promoted as part of the curriculum to foster a cohesive society and ensure that young people understand the values necessary to participate in modern Britain. I'm on board. The key British values, as outlined by the Department for Education, are 1, democracy, the rule of law, individual liberty, mutual respect, and tolerance of those with different faiths and beliefs. Now, democracy and rule of law, we're on board. Individual liberty, this can include things like the right to express opinions freely. So when people talk about the right to free speech, that's what they're referring to. And the right to make personal choices. Mutual respect includes things like treating each other with consideration and understanding, encouraging empathy and respect for differing opinions, cultures, and backgrounds, and ensuring students understand that everyone is entitled to respect and kindness. Everyone is entitled to respect and kindness. And what's the best way we do that? Through our words, through how we speak to people, through how we engage with people. Because words can make people feel loved, wanted, valued, and welcome. Jesus himself used a lot of words. We see it a few times in the Bible. It talks about how our words reveal what's in our hearts. So, for example, it says in Luke, which is a book written by one of Jesus' followers, it said, out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. Out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. Our words are a reflection of our inner character. What we speak flows directly from what we carry in our hearts. And in Philippians, which is a letter written to the church in Philippi, it said, I love this verse. It says, I think this verse, for me, is one of the most challenging verses in the Bible. Whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things. Noble, right, true, pure, lovely, admirable, excellent, and praiseworthy. If we are thinking about such things, then our hearts will be full of such things. And as we read in Luke, what our heart is full of will flow out of our mouths. So we will communicate truth, noble, right, pure, lovely, admirable, excellent, and praiseworthy. And I think that is a pretty good list. However, on the flip side of that, we also see in James in chapter 3, which is a book written by a guy called James, it says, actually this highlights the contradiction that we often see in churches or in Jesus followers. This actually talks about how we often praise God and curse others with the same tongue. And this shows that inconsistency in our speech reveals a deeper issue within our hearts. Some people live with what some people cleverer than me like to call the sacred secular divide. It's just basically it's a posh way of saying that here at church on a Sunday morning, when we're at our house group, when we're with our Christian family and friends, we act one way, we speak one way. Our words reflect the majesty and the glory of God. However, when we're at work, or when we're with our non-Christian mates, or whether we're walking down the street, or whether actually our boss has been really annoying and everyone's moaning about it, and you're like, yeah, you know what? You're right. Or when you're driving on the Long Bridge roundabout, which is one of my least favourite roundabouts known to man, not just because of the forever roadworks, but actually, and someone will be in the wrong lane. Someone will cut you up on that roundabout. Both Longbridge and Hazelwick roundabouts are the worst for it. And actually, at that point, are my words true, noble, right, pure, lovely, admirable, excellent, and praiseworthy? Maybe not. Maybe not. Because we are called to speak well of people. We are called to encourage one another and build one another up. Because our words can also cause destruction, hurt, and distance. Proverbs 18:21 says, death and life are in the power of the tongue. Both death and life are in the power of the tongue. Our words have great power to lift up or to tear down, to bless or to curse. If our hearts are full of love and the Spirit, our words will bring life and love to others. We should be mindful of our speech, as it not only reflects our hearts, but it can affect and influence the hearts of those around us. Going back to that example of actually when you're in the staff room at work, and suddenly actually if you're the person that goes, oh, you know what? My boss this morning, can you believe what he did? Can you believe? And start speaking negatively. How quickly is everyone else joining in? I really hope my boss isn't watching. James, we all love you. This is not a personal story. Sure, he should be at his church, hopefully. But yeah, so when we worship, we use words that focus on what is true, noble, right, pure, lovely, admirable, excellent, and praiseworthy. You're going to go home reciting those 8 because it's just so important. I'm going to keep saying them. Because when we worship, we use those words because we are worshipping God. And God is the epitome of true, noble, right, pure, lovely, admirable, excellent, and praiseworthy. That's why we praise him. And the more we do this, the more we come to God and acknowledge that he is all of those 8 things and so much more beside, then our hearts will be full of it. The more time we spend with God, the more our hearts will be full of those 8 things that you're getting bored of me saying, which will then overflow and will affect and influence those around us just as much as chatting in the office negatively will influence the views and the hearts and the minds of those around us. So will it be if we speak positively. Because worship inspires our everyday speech, our everyday communication, by infusing it with mindfulness, kindness, and a deeper sense of purpose. And it often shows that change in your heart. Now, yesterday, as a leadership team, the deacons and the elders and pastors got together and we did some equality and diversity training, thinking actually it's really important because it is. And we spoke a lot about language and about how we speak. There was an example used that, I'm going to be honest, got mixed reviews in the room. We watched a video and there was a gentleman on the video, not from our church, whatever, who had asked another person to help him man a stall at something that they went to. The person he asked was female. And she went, I can help you run a stall, but I can't exactly help you man it. And there were some people in the room being like, but that's just the English language. That's just how we speak. However, how often does just how we speak have an effect on others that we may not realise? We went round in circles about that exact sentence for quite a while yesterday. Because sometimes maybe what we're saying, and not maybe that example, but what we are saying, whether it be intentionally or whether it not, is it making it harder for other people to access Jesus because our language is getting in the way? There's a great quote from a DC Talk song. Some of you will remember DC Talk. They were very big in the noughties in the Christian world. I loved them. But there's a quote from one of their songs that says, the greatest single cause of atheism in the world today is Christians who acknowledge Jesus with their lips, then turn out the door and deny him by their lifestyle. And that is what an unbelieving world simply finds unbelievable. That is stuck in my head. I didn't even read it. I wrote it on the thing, being like, I still remember this because of how much it struck me. Because actually, if our hearts are full of those things, then when we turn and walk out the door, we will still be acknowledging Jesus with our lips and with our actions. But there are many things that maybe are just a part of how we speak, a part of the English language, that can be really unhelpful, that can be a barrier to people accessing what's going on. For example, phrases like deaf as a doorpost. Actually, that isn't exactly encouraging and welcoming to a person who is deaf. Because you're saying, if you're saying, oh, that person, maybe not a deaf person, maybe an elderly relative of yours, like, oh, they are deaf as a doorpost. You're like, how would that is such a negative spin on something that a lot of people find actually being deaf really life-giving. And these things. So actually, just thinking about our language and how it affects those that you are speaking to. Because they're not helpful. There are always better ways to word something that doesn't leave people feeling excluded. The fact that the title for this that I was given was Inspires Our Everyday Speech. Instantly, I had a gut reaction. I went, but that's not how everyone communicates. I was like, we're fixing that at the very beginning. Because sometimes our words, even when we're talking about words, can be unhelpful. Because it doesn't matter what we think about a person. Let's be honest. It doesn't matter. I don't care what you think. I don't know what your thoughts are about other people, about your boss, about people who are really noisy outside your flat at 3 a.m. because you live in the town centre and there are drunk people outside shouting very loudly. But actually, we are called to love regardless. It's why neither me nor my husband went downstairs. Like, do you mind? I have a child trying to sleep. Because they are also living their life. If I spent all of my days listening to The Beautiful South, Eminem, Little Nas X, etc., I don't imagine that music, that singing along to that, filling my heart with that, is going to inspire me to necessarily see the best in other people. Now, I'm not saying don't listen to them. Don't get me wrong. I love a lot, actually, of music. However, I would probably start talking about X, Y, Z. However, the more time I spend worshiping God, the more time I spend singing praise, the more time I am in his area, I am in his presence, I'm going to start talking about A, B, and C. And A, B, and C is well better than X, Y, and Z. Because we're not called to judge, we're not called to condemn, we're not called to belittle. We're called to love, we're called to inspire, we are called to encourage and raise up. Because worship and spiritual practice have a profound effect on how people communicate, as they shape not only the content, but also the tone and moral quality of everyday speech. These practices, as I say, encourage mindfulness, leading to conversations that are more thoughtful and more deliberate. For example, people who engage in regular worship become more aware of God's power, but also the power of their words, choosing expressions that reflect kindness, gratitude, and respect. This often results in speech that avoids harmful language, such as gossip, slander, profanity, but instead fosters peace and understanding. Spiritual teachings typically emphasize virtues like compassion, honesty, humility, and those things will influence the way that individuals communicate, making their speech more positive and more constructive because their heart is in a better place. In addition, spiritual practices often integrate that, that sacred secular we talked about earlier, will often integrate that sacred language or references to religious concepts, subtly infusing it into everyday interactions with a deeper sense of purpose and alignment for one's faith. By encouraging self-discipline and moral reflection, Worship can nurture and does nurture respectful and spiritually attuned approach to communication, allowing believers to engage with others in a way that reflects their inner values and connection to our divine, holy, magnificent, majestic God. Through this, conversations can become not just a means of exchange, but an expression of a spiritual worldview, a moral compass, and an incredible God. That song, just to sum it all up, that song that we've been singing every week, if you're with us on a Sunday morning, we've been singing it every week through this series, and it's got that half a verse in it that says, I think sums up everything. We could have just sung that song on repeat, and you wouldn't have had to put up with my croaky voice. Because it literally says, Christ be in my speaking, every word a blessing, pure and not deceiving, grace to all who hear. So let's remember that, and hopefully there are some questions which we can ponder upon as I hand back to Daz.
Some questions for you to think about. In your day-to-day life, do you speak more praise and encouragement, or criticism and moaning? Does your language include or create division? This week, who or what are you going to speak positively about? That would normally be a challenge. How can you use words, not just actions, to share Jesus this week?
Lots to think about that. Some very good points. And actually, Helen was saying about it's not just about the words you speak. It might be the text, the emails, that it's the words you use, not just through speech. So we had those questions. Hannah, which question would you like us to cover?
I like the middle one.
Yeah.
This week, who or what are you going to speak positively about that would normally be a challenge? Because I think it's nice to sort of, you can say, oh, I could be a bit more positive, but I like the specific I can't say the word.
Specificity?
Yeah, that one. Of it. So for me, I think I would say that sometimes I struggle to be positive at work all the time, especially around other people's actions, whereas actually like that only really sits negatively with me. So actually I could be more positive and I could make work a nicer environment and a more enjoyable place, but for me and everybody around me. Yeah. So I think that's what I'm going to try this week.
Yeah, because it's kind of like that whole like negativity breeds negativity, positivity breeds positivity. But I understand what you're saying there, because I have times at work where I'm like, I can't see anything that I can pick out the 3 positives of this person right now, this minute. And I think it's also about learning to, a response doesn't need to happen in the moment. So actually pausing a conversation or pausing a response, or just saying, I think this conversation, we'll pick this up a bit later. So you give yourself a bit of that time to be able to speak positively into that situation where it would be normally a challenge. So it's actually about allowing yourself the headroom to come at it in a different way. Whereas sometimes when we're being reactive in those times, it's really difficult, isn't it? To just kind of, because one, you're probably feeling frustrated or annoyed or because something's happened. So actually then your reaction is to be in that moment, isn't it? But actually to stop and take a pause, because you would need to pause probably in those times to think of something positive.
That's why they say sleep on an email before you send it, don't they? Because whenever I go to send it, I'm like, no, I don't need to say that. And you're right. It totally changes just your viewpoint.
That step back. Yeah. What is really urgent? I mean, the only time, your job can be urgent, but what is really urgent, realistically, is if you're going to prevent danger or save somebody's life. So actually, in essence, a lot of what we do in our day to day is not urgent. unless you're trying to stop somebody from hurting themselves. So stop, like one of your children's about to kill themselves, you just go, no, you do have to speak in the moment then. But when you don't need to speak in the moment, and there's not that much in our lives that's so urgent that you need to react in that moment, when you could actually take a pause to think about how you could do it better.
Yeah, you're right.
And I think that the same for me would be a challenge for me at the moment is that I think all three of my children are going through their own little challenges, which is proving challenging at home. And actually it's very difficult when you've got multiple elements coming at you to find the sort of speaking positively into that situation about how they managed something, how they reacted well, didn't react well, but how do you phrase that? I think that's what can be quite difficult.
Yeah.
And Hannah and I were also talking, weren't we, a bit earlier about it's really difficult, and Helen touched on it in her talk, when there's an element of truth to people's moaning. So like actually if it is about a boss, for example, I am a boss, so I have to be really careful here. if there is something about actually they've asked us to do that, it feels really unfair, blah blah blah, and people are picking up on that, and actually there's truth. Maybe it does feel like there's an element of truth. How do you not then get sucked into that that everybody's having a good old whinge and a moan, which is probably the right, there's probably truth and people need to vent. So there's that sort of balance, isn't there, about allowing people to express their feelings, but also not at the detriment maybe of that boss. And then it's starting to get personal. Or so actually maybe our place in that space is to say, yes, but I think, you'll probably find that they've been given these instructions to and it's just passing down the chain, and they're probably not feeling very comfortable, or just bringing that different viewpoint and maybe, like you say, that more positive feeling of environment or support as well.
The context as well. Like you say, actually, you're right. If you know the context, it's a lot more easy to rationalise something.
Yeah. So, and a lot of when I'm trying to lead people in work or even out of work, it's the why behind it that often is missing. So you often think, right, this is what we need to do and how we're going to do it. Even with our family members, even with your children, this is what needs to happen and this is how you're going to do it, like with tidying your room. But the why needs to be there, because otherwise people don't, like you say, the rationale behind it, and that's what can bring negativity and frustration. So have a little think about how you would look. I mean, do reflect. They're really good questions. So the first question, obviously, a bit about what Hannah and I touched on earlier about that sort of positivity versus moaning, praise and encouragement versus criticism and moaning. What are you using your words for? Are you using your words to be good or bad, as it were, for want of a better phrase? And then the question we touched on, which is how are you going to speak positively about that, what would normally be a challenge, or who or what are you going to speak positively to this week? And then the third question that we haven't discussed, but for you to think about, is how can you use words, not just actions, to share Jesus this week? So if you're a Jesus follower and you've got people around you who are not, how can your words, not just actions, show Jesus to people this week? So if you've got any questions about what Helen's talked about today, or anything about this series, or any questions that come to mind about being a Jesus follower or anything to do with church, you could email in on gotquestions@hawleybaptist.org.uk. That's gotquestions@hawleybaptist.org.uk. Also, if you're interested in any of the things that we mentioned earlier, like Alpha, so we've got an Alpha course coming, and Alpha is a course that is about learning about what it is to be a Jesus follower, going to a church, being a Christian. What are those questions that throw up to you? This is held at the church in Hawley, so if you are local, that's something you can also go to. And if you've got anything that you want to know more about what we're doing here online as a church, but also locally, you can email at join.in@hawleybaptist.org.uk. That's join.in@hawleybaptist.org.uk. If you found this talk really useful today, or any of the series that we've done, or anything that we've done in our online content, you know that you can subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us on Facebook, and do share it with a friend.